All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. It really overjoyed me recently, just in the last few weeks, more so especially. And I wouldn't say who the rabbis are because I know that they don't want all sorts of attention. But quite a few prominent rabbis and others that I watched for the first time. It's been astounding the last few weeks. They've been making videos, and I'm not saying they're guaranteeing anybody it's going to happen soon, but for once, like it's never really happened before, where you might get one or two people, even a rabbi over different time periods, claiming such, but you don't ever see it kind of spread and become said by quite a few. And in the last few weeks, quite a few have been saying that we're in the birth pangs of Messiah. Messiah could very well arrive soon. So they're of the same mindset that I've been for all the last bunch of years. As you'd know from my End Days book, um, and what I've been teaching for the last 10 years on YouTube, 2023 is the year that I used to teach starting back in 2016. But part of that program and what I taught was this is tied to the Dome of the Rock being on the Temple Mount and the prophecy of Daniel, which I won't elaborate on here to save time. But it was never just 2023. 2023 correlates to when they started building the Dome of the Rock, but they completed building it in 691, 692 CE or AD. So considering that, it could go all the way up to 2026, 2027. So that's always been the range, in truth. So I've been teaching it for so long now, like 10 years. And I know because I've always been looking and I never see, like I said, you'll get one or two in different periods of time. One or two might talk about it. But there's never been real evidence for it in the world, like it's going to happen. And like I and many others and the rabbis have been doing, they've been talking about how this is the Gog Magog war, that's like starting or whatever. We can observably see that what's taking place in the world is what was foretold in those prophecies, right? About the Gog Magog war. So at whatever stage it's at, but the October 7th attack as well is, right in the same basket with what was said to happen. So it's fair to say that in 2023, all of this, final domino to the end days arrival itself, this final domino started in 2023 and unfortunately started in a sense with the October 7th attacks, but it started in 2023 and it's been ticking over 2024 and we're in 2025. We can see how all the things have escalated in the world between those nations which Ezekiel named and Israel right now. We can see it's playing out, and I've talked about all this stuff a million times before. And it's amazing to see these rabbis, even very prominent ones who I've known and followed, they really feel inside that this is the time. And in Judaism, they do not, you know, just yak whatever they want to yak. They're very, very strict, way more like in Christianity. And I'm a Christian, but in Christianity, you will see people claiming things, prophesying things, and all sorts of stuff, claiming stuff out the yin yang for eternity. They always do that. But in Judaism, it's way more strict, severely strict, right? They don't do that. You're allowed to, speculate and give opinion and this and that there. I'm not saying that they can't do that. That's why you always have like a few who will be saying, oh, these are reasons why we think, we're in the time when the Messiah may arrive. But like I said, of all the years that have transpired up until 23, 24, and 25, we've never had the evidences in the world that these things are taking place. Now we have the evidence. It's been playing out from 23 up until now, and it's significant evidence that brought in Ezekiel's prophecy and even Zechariah's prophecy. We see these things are playing out, which only further confirms Daniel's prophecy, which pinpointed to these years, as I talk about in my teachings in my End Days book, which is available on Amazon. So it's just absolutely amazing that even the rabbis who aren't even a Christian like me, you know what I mean? And that doesn't really matter in this context anyways, but it's just amazing to see them come out and say all their various evidences for it. One rabbi in particular had a video where he was talking about, and it's the only one I've ever seen like this, but he must have been so, overcome to a degree within himself that he wanted to just share this jubilantly, this knowledge. And that's how I feel at times when I'm doing my studies, so I could relate. I could see it in his face, like he was happy to share this and eager to. I could just feel it when he spoke. And he was talking about how it's literally the things that I've been talking about, right? That's what made me smile. But he was saying that in the book of Daniel talks about how these things are sealed up until the end times, and then knowledge goes forth and so forth. Welcome, man. Good to see you. So he started off with that there, and that's something that I've said before as well, because especially in Christianity, everybody says you can't predict or know when the end days will come and the Messiah will come. But it's not up to me. This is what God showed us, even with the maths uh, in the Bible itself, as I show in my book. So by calculation from the prophecies God gave, we're in the time period now leading up until 2026 and even 2027 when it could transpire. But based on the events from 2023 and up until current, it really seems like, and we should consider that it could happen at any moment from now until then, right? So it's definitely imminent. And it's amazing, like I said, to see the rabbis come out there and say this and even bring in the book of Daniel. And that one rabbi was saying that, he feels that now is the time for the prophecies to finally be understood. And the reason he was saying all that is because he and others believe that the evidence is before us in the world that, Ezekiel and Zechariah's prophecies are being fulfilled and that the Messiah is near based on these events. When you bring in the book of Daniel to it, but still, most people have included in, like I did, and as I teach, with Islam being the final beast kingdom, how that aligns with extremely important historical events that pertain to Israel and the world. Um, the final beast kingdom definitely was Islam. Even when you use AI software and ask it and provide it the criteria and say, is Islam a more fitting candidate than Rome, or what would be another? It always comes down to the evidence is pretty much overwhelming uh, that Islam was the final and is the final beast kingdom. Rome is ruled out because it contradicts what the verses say. So it's not Rome, but a lot of people, even in Judaism and Christianity, both think that it's Rome in some way, or like a rebirth of Rome. Um, some people in Judaism say it's Christianity that's the final beast kingdom, how Christians in the medieval ages and such oppressed Judaism and all that. Um, but the final beast kingdom definitely is Islam. And when you bring in Daniel's prophecy into all these other prophecies, it just makes it far more, just everything locks into place. The reason why those Gog Magog nations that Ezekiel named are attacking falls right into place because they're all the Islamic nations of today. The ones that he lists off in Ezekiel that would comprise the tribes of Gog Magog, or the bands of Gog Magog, the nations that would join them. So it just everything fits together. So it has to be correct. And I was warning about this time period being the end, starting in 2016 on my first YouTube channels, right? I knew about it beforehand myself, but that was the year I got my first YouTube channels. I made a couple or a few YouTube channels, and they don't exist anymore. But and I have another one which I used before this one. It's still active as well. That's why I used the name Enoch Witness for both, in case anybody's curious. But I've been teaching about this for a long time, and it's very, very exciting. But not that I'm rejoicing in bad events in the world, but it's just very exciting knowing that these things are happening because it shows that it's all coming true. And I'll say it again because it's so important, but I even asked the AI software and I used the one that's accredited as being one of the best available. And I asked it a very long question with lots of criteria about the book of the prophecy of Ezekiel, and the criteria being the certain things that are taking place and the certain things that were said to take place. And I asked the AI to calculate. You could only approximate, obviously, right? But to calculate the mathematical probability odds of if this prophecy of Ezekiel was fake, just bogus. It's not real prophecy, or, God doesn't exist and it's not real prophecy, whatever a skeptic might say from any angle. But if that prophecy was just made up and it's not divine prophecy from God, what would be the mathematical probability odds that all of the things that Ezekiel foretold, which have now occurred, what would be the odds of that actually happening coincidentally? Right? So it was 1 in 50 billion odds, which, like I said, if we had one chance for the end days to arrive in each given year, we'd have to go through over 3 cycles of the universe from the Big Bang as we know it. 3 cycles would only be 45 billion years, roughly. So we would need towards 4 cycles of the universe if we had one chance every of those years for the end days to arrive. So that shows you just how extreme 1 in 50 billion is. But that's just going by the prophecy of Ezekiel. If you were to, which doesn't include numbers and other very specific things like you do in the prophecy of Daniel. If you were to put the prophecy of Daniel into that, we could only imagine it would be like 1 in 50 trillion. You'd be off the charts, right? So the odds are beyond highly in favor. I think using science, the mathematical odds show that it's impossible that these prophecies are fake, because the things that they said would occur have occurred. Okay, all of them except for the very last thing, which is the arrival itself of the end days with the forces of God and the Messiah and all that. Right, so we're that close to the end. So all these things being fulfilled, the odds are impossible that it's bogus. And if it's not bogus, so if we can, is it real? Is it not real? Well, we can rule out that it's certainly not fake, because if it was fake, it's impossible for all these things to come to pass. So it's not a fake prophecy. So if it's not fake, it's real. Okay, you're not going to have one in between, right? So if it's a real prophecy, that would obviously explain why all those things have come to pass. Okay, and the odds are astronomical, like I said. So obviously, the prophecies are real, meaning they are from God and they're legit prophecies. That's why they have all come true. And now we're just on that last little speck, that last domino. It's already been tipped over, it's already falling over. It's just the last action sequence. That's what we're in right now, at this doorstep to that arriving. Okay, and even if you're to look at it from a skeptical angle, like I say, the mathematical odds show, it should show a skeptic that the odds are in favor that this is real. Okay, so there you go. And it's just amazing to see that these rabbis have tuned into this reality, and even they're saying it, because, I would like to, I know I worked really hard on my studies for over 20 years, but nonetheless, I would like to think that they probably even study harder and work harder. I mean, like, every rabbi's got a bookshelf that's like 3 times the size of mine. Um, and they do study very, very hard, which you don't really see Christians doing. I did go overboard in my studies for a number of years, like 4 to 8 hours a day, sometimes more. That was a bit ridiculous. I can't do that anymore. But I'll give them credit and say that they probably study and work harder at all that than I did. And for them to come out with their fine tooth combs and say with their discernment that, hey, we could see from the evidence that the Messiah is coming. And the beauty in this is that, just like when I quizzed the AI, I only gave it criteria for Ezekiel's prophecy. If you were to factor in Daniel's, like I said, it would be even more evidence for what I'm saying, right? The odds would be even more impossible to be a fake prophecy. But the rabbis who are saying that, the end is near and all this, but they don't say it like that, obviously, right? But the rabbis who are saying this, which is in agreement with what I've been teaching, they're not even really, they're not factoring in the book of Daniel. I know I said there is a one rabbi who was talking about it, right? But the other ones aren't. The reason why they're all feeling like this is the end of days upon us is because of the events in Ezekiel's prophecy, right? Because in Judaism, I don't really think it's a belief held anywhere, especially predominantly, that Islam is the final beast kingdom. They usually believe it's Rome or Christians or a mix of both. So I could pretty much automatically rule out that, they believe, if you understand Islam is the final beast kingdom, then everything that Daniel says with the numbers and everything from God make perfect sense with historical events, like the Dome of the Rock and the 1260 years from the Dome of the Rock to the rebirth of Israel. And then after that final 75 years, it brings you to 1335 and other related things as well, right? So you get into much more specific things. And if the rabbis have come to the same conclusion as me, to the point where they're actually out there saying it, but they're just basing that belief, feeling, and understanding on Ezekiel primarily, that goes to show you how much evidence there really is. That when you do understand Daniel and Islam as the final beast kingdom, and all the numbers and the prophecies that make perfect clear sense to you, as I show in my End Days book, once you see that everything that has transpired um, before 1948, after 1948, up until now, the way it's ramping up now, everything makes perfect sense, right? Absolute perfect sense. Um, and there's other evidence from the New Testament I could throw in as well that further corroborates it, right? Um, but yeah, this is definitely the time. So all I can say for everybody is, I was going to make a separate video about this, but I can make it a short, quick message. But my tips, with all my lifetime of experience, all my many decades now, I can say that if you were to sum up into a few golden nuggets, what you should do to, pass at your judgment day, become a good person, all that is, number one, reform from your sins. So stop doing all the bad, stop thinking all the bad, start doing all the good and thinking all the good. Start being good and stop being bad. That's number one. That's a simple golden nugget to remember. Number two, a tip or a hint that I'll throw in based on my life experience, is we should always be grateful to God, because every little thing that happens that's beneficial to us or good and we're pleased with in life, a lot of times you might just pass it off and just be like, oh, it was coincidence or it was nature. But, God may have had a hand in every single one of those. And if you're not thanking him for it and being appreciative of it, your little blessings in life, in your daily life, they might just stop one day. And think about it, what your life would be like if those simple blessings that you always get stop. Things that came to you easy or whatever it might be, stop and become difficult. You don't want to be ungrateful. So stop and think, every single time something works out for you, how big or small, thank God for it. And he probably does have a hand in every single one of them anyways, right? But you need to do that. Start every time you say a prayer to God, as the scripture says, you should start it off with, please, open your prayer. But the first thing that you say or pray about, the first thing that you should say is, please forgive me for my sins, right? In whatever way that you want. But you don't want to start off any type of dialogue or asking God for stuff, especially if you're a sinner, you're unrepentant, unreformed, or ignorant, or whatever it might be. Even if you are, what you want to do is pay the respect and start off your prayer with, please forgive me for my sins. So you don't look like a greedy sinner asking for things when you don't deserve it, right? So include that aspect in every prayer that you say. Start off your prayer, every prayer. I'm not saying, open your prayer with that, right? You open your prayer to God in whatever way that you do, but make that the first part of what you talk about. And reform. These are the two most important things. So and be what was the be grateful, right? Be grateful and thank God. Uh, that's what that's about. And I threw in a third golden nugget, which is start off your prayers with that, right? But do these three things; they'll really, really help you to purify yourself and make yourself worthy for when these times do come. Because if you don't reform, then you won't be saved. Or it might be difficult for you to be saved. It's up to God, but we're taught to reform, so you better reform. And you should be grateful. If you're ungrateful, then, like I said, those little blessings or the big blessings might stop and go away. And you know, instead of God holding away the curses or the bad things, then the bad things might start coming at you. The bad events or bad turnouts or whatever it might be. You don't want that to happen. So don't be ungrateful and think that, oh, it'll be like this even if God wasn't around, because He's pulling the strings on everything, and you have to be grateful, right? So those are all my recommendations for everybody today. And take care, folks, and God bless. I got to run because I'm pretty late. So see you all later.